to galacticconnection.com, one of the most popular blogs on the World Wide Web today for alternative news. Stay tuned for the latest information on our world shift from enslavement to galactic involvement, as well as current intel on any blockages impeding us from our sovereign birthright. Knowledge and self-mastery are key at this time. Our commitment is to present you with the latest breaking conspiratorial articles, off-world messages, exopolitics, cutting-edge technologies and sciences, and also an ever-significant intertwining of spiritual support and metaphysical scope that one needs to dive down the rabbit hole in search for truth with balance. We are truly on the horizon of a new golden age filled with the promise for more love, worldwide peace, and accelerated intuitive skills, where every living being can exist in cohesion and abundance. It is whatever we envision and dream this new world to be. I say to you now, let's redefine the new world to the beginnings of our own precious heaven on earth. Galactic Connection is here to provide the pulse of Mother Earth through an eclectic range of interviews each Tuesday afternoon from 3 to 4:55 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Station 2 on BBS Radio, expanding your perspectives on how we can once and for all take back our freedoms, our joy, and our connection with our mighty I Am presence. Our intention remains true to connect hearts and minds everywhere in order to obtain global unity and galactic and universal acceptance. Our discussions will continue to cover anything to do with galactic society and our involvement with our galactic brothers and sisters. Our guests are experts in their fields, and our radio shows have been coined as some of the most thought-provoking out there. In addition to our daily blog, which runs 365 days a year, we also offer a realm of healing services such as our world-renowned implant removal processes, our spiritual past life clearings, our galactic violet ray alchemy from Alexandra, who shares in the lineage of Merlin, and other cutting-edge healing technologies. Check our site out at galacticconnection.com now, sending you a wave of light, love, and inspiration, and a personal hug and thank you for listening to our Galactic Connection radio show and visiting our blog today. Good morning, everyone. This is Alexandra Metters, galacticconnection.com, and I have an on-the-fly interview today, an urgent request by none other than Kevin Annett. If you would like to jump on his website while you're listening to this, it's at itccs.org, and he has some really great news today, actually very inspiring, because it's truly showing that the light is prevailing. So for those of you who are not familiar with Kevin, he is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee for 2013, 14, and 15. Wow. He's also a community minister, human rights consultant, and special advisor to the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, which is what ITCCS stands for. He also is an award-winning documentary filmmaker for that which is entitled Unrepentant. That was back in 2007. He's also an author, and I could go on and on. This man never stops blowing me away with his power and his dedication and his commitment to exposing what I consider to be the most vile virus on this planet, and that is the constant attack of our children and of our species, and the feeding off of through satanic ritual, etc., through churches and ritualism. So anyway, Kevin, we made it.
We did. Good to be back.
So, wow, you have a lot to say, and I kind of want everyone to understand that this is really, really big news that he's come across. And in fact, it's so big that he couldn't wait to get this out today. I personally feel I'm not going to be saying a whole lot because there's too much to review, but what I did want to say is he is going to be discussing a memo, and this is the quotation that he put out yesterday. It says, "This memo explains why the first independent inquiry into residential school crimes in June of 1998 was so effectively disrupted and halted, and why so many key witnesses have been shut down or even killed since 1998. This memo shows how the enormous black ops and smear campaign against ITCCS and Kevin Annett is connected to this covert program by the Canadian government, and that it is still killing off Native people today. It all confirms an enormous and deliberate travesty of justice by church and state in Canada to conceal their own crimes. And this is also written, apparently, right, in the Murder by Decree book, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, exactly, Alexandra. And the reason that happened is because of the memo that was released this past week to the ITCCS office. This is coming from a civil servant within one of the intelligence organizations in the Canadian government. Essentially what this memo did was it came out on April 3rd, 1998, and it said to the Liberal government at the time of Prime Minister Jean Chretien, it basically said, we have to shut down any independent voice, any activist trying to campaign on the missing or murdered children, any independent inquiry, and especially the eyewitnesses to these murders have to, and their quote is, has to be either contained or eliminated. That's the wording of the memo. Now, this memo went to the Prime Minister's office, 3 senior cabinet ministers, and it was adopted clearly because when you look at all of the events at the time, that's exactly what was going on. This memo came out just 2 months after we had held our first mass meeting ever held of residential school survivors in Vancouver, 2 months before the June 1998 tribunal. That was the first tribunal ever held in Canada into the residential school crimes. And the same month that the British Columbia Supreme Court had brought in the first ruling saying the government and the churches of Canada were guilty of all these crimes and were liable under the law. Now, obviously the government panicked and they said, look, we've got to clean up this whole situation quick. And clearly they authorized a regime of state terror, which claimed the lives of at least 9 of our own people who were killed by police. This is all being discussed elsewhere. All of this, including the so-called Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a huge whitewash, all of that came out of that one memo, April 3rd, 1998.
Hey, Kevin, stress to them who these 9 people within your organization were, because you very specifically notate that they were on your front line.
They were. These are all 9 Aboriginal people, men and women, who mostly homeless people that I come to know over the years, but they had all survived Indian so-called residential schools. They had seen killings. They had taken part in burials of children. They were at the front line. So when we were holding church protests, for example, one of them, Bingo Dawson, he led the occupation of Holy Rosary Catholic Church in February of 2007, which led directly to the apology. It was these church occupations that were forcing the government to come around and start paying lip service, at least, to the fact that these children had died. Now, Bingo was beaten to death by 3 policemen. That was eyewitnessed by another person who was also killed after. William Coombs, who saw Queen Elizabeth take 10 children out of the Kamloops residential school who were never seen again. He died of lethal injection at St. Paul's Catholic Hospital. Now, all of this is happening after this memo, and it's not accidental because the government had authorized all of these actions.
That's incredible. And now you also mentioned something about they were literally dictating the memo that they harass the citizens if they go into any type of campaign situation, correct?
That's right. I can read from part of the memo, one of the extracts.
Yeah, I think you should.
ITCCS.org. This is what the memo says. A growing unrest among West Coast Aboriginals associated with the litigation presently before the Supreme Court may lead to the rise of splinter factions that seek to exploit public sentiment over the United Church residential school disclosures. Protests and other direct actions by the Native Youth Movement and the group associated with Annett, yours truly, and Nahanni, that's Harriet Nahanni, have already been planned in these circles. Any independent investigations by these groups into burial sites near Alberni Residential School could spell disaster and must be stopped, get this, through special ops conducted by the usual RCMP units and private contracted parties.
Wow.
The living Aboriginal witnesses poses damaging the security risk to the government and the churches responsible, as do such investigations. These witnesses must be contained or eliminated, unquote.
And that's actually in writing in this memo that you got your hands on.
The memo is presently held by the ITCCF's office in Brussels, where I assume the eyewitness is gone. I'm assuming he's not in the country because that's usual protocol. When you have key witnesses, you bring them out.
Sure.
For safety. This witness has agreed to go on record. That is, he's going to be filmed, whether that's anonymously, like his face blacked out and voice muffled or whatever. He has agreed to go on record, and this memo is apparently going to be circulated quite soon.
That's crazy. Now, flip back to the historical ruling that the Canadian government had when they basically said that the church and the state were both equally liable for these crimes against.
I know really well about that because after it was just a couple of years after I was fired by the United Church for bringing this stuff out on Vancouver Island. But I was asked to be a consultant in the first lawsuit. It was called the Brenner decision in the BC Supreme Court. And it basically looked at all the evidence that I helped to provide and other people had given it. And it said the United Church and the government are equally liable for all of the damages that happened to these children, not just physical and sexual assault, but the death of children, reports of torture and medical experimentation, all of these things that were surfacing. And what my research was also being published at the time and was all bringing out, they were found liable in the Brenner decision, June 1998. Well, I mean, you know, at that point, within a year, the floodgates had opened and there were thousands of lawsuits that had been commenced against the Catholic, the Anglican, and the United Church. So it just blew the whole thing wide open. And clearly this memo is a response to it to try to shut the whole thing down.
Interesting. And so have you had any feedback from those actual lawsuits as far as what the decisions were?
Well, the thing that the government did after that is they stepped in after consulting in the back room with the churches, and they did what they did in Ireland and any other place where this stuff came out. They legally indemnified themselves, which means they agreed that nobody would ever be prosecuted. And in return, they would give out a little bit of money to various selected survivors and call that healing. But the survivors would have to sign off any legal action against the churches and government. So it's a way to really tie up the whole thing and keep it all quiet. But the significant thing about all this is that it didn't just happen randomly. It came from a government order. It came from an official act of state terrorism, and they're responsible for the deaths of all the people subsequently because of that.
Oh my God. So this is huge because you actually have a piece of testimony. You have proof. You have evidence. You know, you've always suspected this. I mean, every time I've interviewed you, you already knew because you were in the thick of it.
You know, you can suspect things. You know, you can see patterns because of, you know, what's going on. But it really hit me home when I saw this, just at a personal level, not because of these friends I've lost and other things, but, you know, the whole massive smear campaign that's gone on for years against me and the ITCCS, again, it's coming out of this memo because part of a black ops operation is you target the most public, the most forceful people and start a rumor campaign about them, which you can see all over the internet. It's still there. And people would often say to me, well, how could that smear campaign go on over years unless it was well-funded and well-organized? And, well, here we see where it's coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's all different, you know, what I have found just through the intel that's come through Galactic Connection, there's all different types of factions with different agendas to bring down the child pedophilia. But then there's all this attached agenda to it rather than just the purity of let's save these children.
Exactly.
And let's bring out the truth. And what do you think about that?
Well, you know, that's exactly right. And you find out very quickly who's running according to ego and who's genuinely committed. I love that quote, that whoever seeks the truth must be as humble as dust. I think Gandhi said that. And it's true, you have to, in all humility, ask yourself all the time, are you doing the right thing? And that tends to keep you on course. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons that I published Murder by Decree, The Crime of Genocide in Canada, which people can get at Amazon now. And it's to show all of these things that were concealed. All of this, the information that was deliberately censored out by the government's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that's all in this book now. And, you know, I always publish things without copyright because it's public knowledge. It needs to be out there.
Right on. Right on. And, you know, the other thing I wanted you to share with everyone is what are the sorts of actions that they took to silence the people other than the lethal injections, you know, the heart attack, which was probably some sort of ray gun and that kind of thing. What were the typical modus operandi, not just from your frontliners, but from the classic, you know, trying to shut down the journalists, you know, any kind of newspaper coverage? What do they normally do in that scenario?
Well, you see, in kind of the mainstream so-called white world, it's easy to shut people down. All you have to do is accuse somebody else of being crazy. And that's usually does it, especially in Canada. You know, I call it the C word. You call somebody controversial up here and it's like, whoa, forget it, we can't talk to them. Very different than an American reaction. But, you know, usually that's enough. Like, and we know that the RCMP went to Vancouver reporters all during this time that we're holding our tribunal when the memo first came out. And they said, you know, you can't trust Kevin Annett. He's making it all up. He doesn't have any proof. None of the natives work with him. All of those lies. But if you're a reporter, who are you going to believe? The RCMP or some defrocked minister, right? Who are you going to believe? The entire church or one lone individual? So with most people, it's relatively easy to get them to turn the other way. But if it doesn't work, you can start doing things like, you know, threatening their income. We know that every United Church minister was told not to come to my defrocking hearing or they'd lose their pension. They were told that. But,
wow. I didn't know that. I don't remember you ever telling me that one. Wow.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much, it's hard to recall it all, but
they really have cojones, don't they?
Well, you know, you can when you have a lot of money behind you and you think you're God. But the point is they're also very vulnerable because they know they're guilty. And if you go to itccs.org and go back, not the latest posting about this memo, but the one before it, there was another very important breaking story about this independent missing people's inquiry happening right now in the west coast of Canada. Now, what this memo that just came out said is that the same RCMP units that, you know, took out the people back in 1998 and stopped these inquiries, they're still active. They are still driving Native people off their land at the behest of Chinese and American corporations. They're working with these private contractors who are really, you know, hit squads, you know, as every corporation has these things, to terrorize Native people off their land. So these crimes are not stopping, they're continuing. And in fact, if you read in that report, we found hard evidence that Chinese companies are operating right now, doing that kind of thing in British Columbia as part of a policy of colonizing the area with Chinese settlers. That's hard evidence from people on the ground who've seen it happen.
Well, you know, and that I was going to ask you about who received this memo. I noticed there was a Liberal Prime Minister, Chretien, is that how you say it?
Chretien, Jean Chretien.
Okay. And an Assistant Prime Minister Gray, Minister of Indian Affairs,
Jane Stewart.
Jane Stewart and Minister of Justice and an Attorney General, Anne McClellan, who we've talked about before. Can you give me an idea of who are these people? What, you know, why is this sent to them? What is the protocol as far as when they receive something of this nature?
Well, they're part of what's called the Privy Council in Canada. Like, it's a colonial system in Canada. The Governor General is the Queen's representative. And the Privy Council, they make the laws. About 80% of all laws passed in Canada are not passed by the legislature, by Parliament. They're passed in order in council, which is a bunch, 6 or 7 people sitting around drafting a law and saying it's law. And so, you know, the Privy Council, this inner circle, now all of those 4 were part of the Privy Council. So again, it's like the legislation that brought in the Indian residential schools and all these crimes, they're all in council. They're never debated in Parliament. The people don't know anything about it. And what's significant about those 4 people is the Prime Minister, Jean Chretien, and Anne McClellan, the Justice Minister and Attorney General. They're both, at the time, and they still are, shareholders in Power Corporation and Camco, which is the biggest uranium company in Canada. And they have a vested interest in driving Native people off their land. In northern Saskatchewan, the U.S. military gets depleted uranium from those uranium mines, and they've got to terrorize the natives off their land to get it. And those people had a vested interest in that memo because they knew by wiping out the Native opposition, they were lining their own pocket. So that was very significant about those two individuals.
I was going to say, just the fact that those names were on that memo was, in my opinion, huge. Now, is this still going on a very major scale, or have they toned things down a bit as far as, not only abducting children off of the reservations, but also more and more children are being removed for the purposes of child sacrifice and that kind of thing?
Well, the thing to know here, Alexandra, is that it's all become so institutionalized. The child trafficking operates right in the government system, just like it does in America or anywhere in the world. Vulnerable mothers, single mothers are targeted. They're criminalized, especially if they're Native, because they don't fall under the law of Canada. They're under the Indian Act, where they're not citizens but wards of the state. So you can do whatever you want to in India and under the law, and there won't be a repercussion. They seize the children that way and traffic them all over. But there's also been, as you saw with the release of this so-called Truth and Reconciliation report, there's this massive mind control program going on in Canada now, where you hear reconciliation all the time. We've made up with the Indians. We're all healing and reconciled now. Aren't we good? Justin Trudeau, the new, the kind of cool-looking young prime minister, he's the epitome of that fact. It's this massive brainwashing, make people think none of that bad stuff is happening anymore, when in fact, when that kind of thing goes on, you've got to be all the more vigilant because you know it's happening all the more. That's just the fog and mirrors they put out to distract. And it's like with the new Pope or Obama when he came in, it's the new window dressing to fool people, because most people don't look past the window dressing.
Yeah. And do you have any new statistics as far as how many children you're now finding are missing and or murdered?
Yeah, in that second report in itccs.org, if you go back one, you'll see in there that the initial report of there's some people on the West Coast who are doing their own count of the missing people. And it says that it's much higher than was originally estimated, because in the original police report, they would find individual Aboriginal missing women who had gone missing for years and then report them. They didn't look at the entire community or the whole pattern. They just looked at certain areas. When you look at the whole province, there are literally hundreds of Aboriginal women, and not just women, but their entire families that have gone right off the map. They've just vanished. And this is a massive disappearance going on the level of Central America or China or any of the places where people, there's state terror going on to just drive people out of the area. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are going missing all the time. And again, this is to clear out British Columbia of natives, because look, a quarter of the hydroelectric power in North America comes from that province. The resources, the oil, the uranium, the mining, the water, which is key resource, all coming out of Western Canada. So that's where the final step of genocide is carrying on. This is what this is all an indication of.
Wow. And any report, I haven't talked to you in so long, anything coming out of the Vatican, any word from them?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because in one of the other reports we put out recently, a Catholic archbishop in Quebec has just announced that no priest is allowed to be alone with children anymore.
Wow.
It came out in the Guardian newspaper on June 24th, and we commented on it because it's interesting. The very guy making that announcement, suddenly priests can't be with children, which, when you think about it, is an amazing admission of guilt.
I mean, and the fact that whether they'll even implement it is a question mark, but it's great that it's being stated.
Well, yeah, and the guy's name is Archbishop Chretien. And if you remember, a couple of years ago, the ITCCS stopped a child ritual killing in Montreal by the Ninth Circle. Yeah. And Cardinal Gerald Lacroix was named as somebody who was participating in that, and in one in Rome at a Jesuit church. This Chretien is a confidant of Archbishop Lacroix, and in fact, his name was discovered in material related to the Ninth Circle. So in other words, the man who himself is being exposed as a participant in child trafficking and murder suddenly announces to all of his priests, you can't be with children anymore. That, to me, is somebody who's in a panic mode, And it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot in a big way, saying, yeah, it's dangerous for children to be with Catholic priests. That's a sign, as Sun Tzu would say in The Art of War, that's the sign of an army about to collapse when they're doing those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that feels the case around the world, doesn't it, Kevin? The news around the world is just, it's ongoing. It never stops lately. It's just one exposure after another.
Well, that's right. And their house of cards is coming down in a big way. And these are all signs of it. These are all tips of the same iceberg. Another example, in Altoona, Pennsylvania, there's been an investigation into child trafficking in the Catholic Church there. Well, the grand jury that it was convened a couple of months in April has just released a report, and I can send this to you. The grand jury report says that the Catholic Diocese of Altoona and Johnstown has a secret archive of all of the records of priests abusing children. That archive is under lock and key of the bishop. And the bishop, Stephen Reka, his name is, he is ordered not to ever release that. Well, the grand jury's investigators got into the file, and they found that, in fact, this secret archive is standard policy in the Catholic Church. So what that's confirming is what we already knew about this policy of crimen solicitatis, where every Catholic in the world is ordered not to ever tell the police about child abuse. The prosecutor said this discovery is tantamount to a broad system of planned criminal conspiracy to aid and abet child traffickers. So they're finally acknowledging from that one case in Pennsylvania, something that goes on everywhere, that the Catholic Church is a criminal conspiracy protecting child rapists.
So really, we're really making some progress here. It feels good. How about the whole story out of the Netherlands? Anything going on with the...
Well, it's interesting because the thing that I got to notice when this other stuff came from ITCCS about the government memo in Canada, what they said was in Brussels, if you remember, there was a politician named Laurent Louis.
Yes, that's who I was alluding to.
Yeah, he stood up in the Belgian parliament. He accused Mark Rutte, who was the prime minister, of being a child trafficker and a child rapist. He was thrown out of parliament despite his immunity. They made sure he was never reelected. He faced imprisonment and €50,000 fine, all of this trumped up charge. Well, he's back in action now. He's running again for office. He's raising this whole thing again. He's, for the first time in years, getting media coverage again. And, they have big demonstrations over there. I remember there was like 10,000 people protesting outside the Belgian parliament when this stuff came out. I mean, I can't even imagine 100 people in North America going into the streets for a child rapist, let alone 10,000. So, it shows you that this stuff is never suppressed. It always keeps coming in waves like the tide. And we're definitely on a high tide right now.
That's huge. And when you get stories like that, send them our way so Galactic Connection can put them out there. Seriously.
Well, I try, but Skype and Facebook and my emails have been under serious attack.
Oh, I know that. And, I'm using Zoom today, and I have no problems, and yet I can see that it's being messed with. Mm-hmm. If you haven't already noticed. Now, you talk a lot about common law, bringing forth the new common law republic, and de-establishing the Crown authority. What's going on in that arena?
There's been a lot of off-the-radar stuff going on. We've been, for example, in Ontario, there's 3 different areas where we've been holding training workshops for people who want to learn the common law, to convene common law courts, to train as sheriffs, to enforce these warrants. So there's a lot of that grassroots work going on now. There's more people doing the training, which is very encouraging. Now, the next big step is to get them active in doing not just the things like the citizen arrests of known child raping priests, for example, but actually going to town councils and saying, it's time to withhold taxes from the federal government because they are part of a criminal body. Keep the money in the community. Convene your own assemblies. That kind of direct action locally. I remember when I was, a few months ago, I was in Sacramento giving a workshop. And people there were saying, well, that's exactly what we need to start doing over these smart meters. Just say to the local town council, we're not going to allow these things anymore. You've got to take responsibility here. So we find at the local level, it's more possible to take that action, give people a sense that they can do something in their own community.
There's definitely a lot of action being taken on the grassroots movement level, especially with the sheriff's departments. A lot of people are interacting with them face to face, really trying to educate them, and they're being very receptive in certain parts of the United States in particular. I'm going to talk about that's really promising. That is very promising. I do still intend to assist you, Kevin, in throwing one of your workshops here in SoCal. I would just need help, and we do have some volunteers stepping forward to assist us. So we can still pursue that, you know.
As the September approaches, we're starting a new speaking tour by me and other people across North America and then over to Europe. I've been invited to Prague to speak at a conference in October with David Icke and other people.
Cool.
And so I'll be going over there. But the big focus in September will be I'll be going to the campuses, pushing my books, and holding these workshops. So we can easily arrange stuff in California or wherever.
Right on. And now, right now, are you actively involved in your radio show still? Are you still doing that?
Yeah, I meant to, thank you. Radio Free Canada.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, Radio Free Canada has been offline for a number of months, but it's coming on again. It's coming online September 4th. So I just wanted to plug that for people. Sunday, September 4th, 3 p.m. Pacific, you go to the BPS Radio Network and it'll be online. So we can talk more about that. We've got a number of good shows planned.
So just so everybody hears this, sorry about that, there's a telephone going off and I'm not at home at the moment. So can you clarify again that your actual radio show is on Sundays at?
Yeah, it's Radio Free Canada, Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern.
Perfect.
bpsradio.com/Radio Free Canada, Kanata. Again, write to me, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com. We're already planning the programs, which are going to have a really clear common law focus, but also a very focused spiritual content this time as well.
It's so important. It's so important, folks, because a lot of people don't want to read about this information. And I don't really honestly enjoy talking about it either, but it's necessity for us to keep our eyes open because this truly is the root, in my opinion, of all evil. This is where it's at. And this is where all the light workers around the world need to be continuing to be vigilant and doing your light work to bring this network down. When we bring this network down, it's over. It's game over. Seriously. One last thing, you know, since you're a scholar of the Bible, a lot of people talk about the satanic influence of this network versus the Luciferian influence. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you see the difference between those two?
Well, it's kind of like touching the elephant. In some ways, they're referring to the same thing. Of course, Satan simply means adversary. Because in the Bible, Satan was not the opponent of God, but his servant, who's used by God in the world to test people. Lucifer, light bearer, again, you know, because Christianity and Judaism, they're coming from two different traditions: the monotheistic tradition, where God is both good and evil, and the dualistic, like where the Cathars and others came from, which is that, no, you've got two forces in the universe, one good and one evil, and they're fighting each other all the time. Yes. So we have all those ideas mixed together, and it really influences the way we see, you know, these terms, Lucifer, Satan, all that. But for me, the bottom line is, what do these groups do in practice? We know that groups that call themselves satanic, Luciferian, are actively engaged in child sacrifice. It's part of their lifeblood. We know that the elites are engaged in this on a routine basis. So, you know, like whatever you call it, it's the same evil. And I think it's important not to get caught up in the terms, but strike at the practice and understand that all of that is about the degradation of human beings and the loss of their own inner spiritual light are dehumanizing. And so I mean, that's generally how I approach it. We could go into that for a whole show, but it's kind of my opinion.
Be interesting. I think everybody would be really interested in that. I'd love to also review just biblically how that is paralleling what's going on right now on the planet. There's some very, very interesting morsels there. Well, is there anything else that you need to relay today?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention again to people my two new books, Unrelenting, Between Sodom and Zion, and Murder by Decree, The Crime of Genocide in Canada, which is also up online, murderbydecree.com. You can get both books at Amazon or createspace.com. I often try to get these books with me whenever I go on tour, because whenever they go into libraries in Canada, they disappear within a week or two. We've even, on the Vancouver library system, sent out a directive not to carry these books. So, it requires the people listening, just people on the ground ordering these things, to get out this really sacred history of what really went on. Because if you don't understand that, we can't understand what's going on today.
Yeah, and don't forget, David Icke, for years and years and years, couldn't get his books into any library or bookstore, and now they're all over the place. So your time will come, Oh,
yeah. Well, I see this shift happening everywhere, so I'm not.
Yeah, so I just want to thank everybody for listening. I know that this sometimes gets really a little intense for us to hear about this type of information, but really good for us to have our ear to the ground and hear about the victories that are occurring and some of the exposures that are finally being presented to the world, and through someone such as Kevin, who has an impeccable, in my opinion, impeccable sense of integrity. So thank you once again. Please don't forget to visit his murderbydecree.com website to check out his books. I have both of them. They're very, very detailed accounts of what he has found through his investigations of those that have been murdered or have disappeared. Okay. And as always, please continue to support galacticconnection.com. We have our daily blog 365 days a year, and we have hundreds of interviews on the YouTube channel, Vimeo, and you can also check us out on BBS Radio. So stay tuned. We'll be talking to you soon. Hopefully next time we have this interview with Kevin, maybe, just maybe, it will have stopped. We have toppled and cut the head off of the beast.
Then I can take a vacation.
Yeah, you and me both. A vacation? What's that?
Yeah, really. We've got a few places in mind.
Okay, everyone. Lots of love. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again, Kevin.